Growing up, I always knew I wasn't my mother's favorite. Maybe it was the way she praised my siblings for the smallest accomplishments while ignoring my biggest milestones. Or maybe it was the way she sighed whenever I entered a room, as if I was some burden she had to endure. Still, despite everything, I kept trying. I wanted her approval more than anything in the world. I thought maybe if I worked harder, smiled bigger, kept my head down longer, she'd finally see me the way she saw the others. That illusion shattered one night at a family gathering. It was my cousin's engagement party. A big deal in our family. Everyone was dressed to the nines, laughing, drinking, clinking glasses, the house filled with the warm buzz of celebration. I stood near the fireplace, chatting politely with some distant relatives when my mother's voice cut through the noise. Like a knife. "Oh, him?" she said loudly, her voice dripping with disgust. "He's the shame of our family!" Silence fell over the room. Every head turned toward me. My heart dropped into my stomach. I looked around, praying I'd misheard, but the way people averted, their gazes confirmed it. My mother didn't stop there. She kept going, listing off all the ways I'd failed, how I hadn't become a doctor like she wanted, how I didn't make enough money to show off to her friends, how I was a disappointment. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to disappear right there, sink into the floor and never come back. Instead, I just stood there, frozen, while she humiliated me in front of the entire family. That night, something inside me broke. I realized I had spent my entire life chasing approval that was never going to come. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, I would never be enough for her. So I stopped trying. I moved out a few weeks later, found a tiny apartment in a rough part of town, and started over. At first, it was brutal. I worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. Some nights, I went to bed hungry. But for the first time in my life, I was living for myself, not for someone else's impossible expectations. Slowly, things started to change. I got a better job. I started my own small business, something I'd always dreamed of, but was too scared to pursue because I knew my mother would mock me. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. There were months I thought I'd lose it all. But I kept going. 5 years later, my business had grown beyond anything I could have imagined. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I had employees, savings, a nice apartment. Most importantly, I had peace. I hadn't spoken to my mother in all that time, until she showed up at my office one rainy Thursday afternoon. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked smaller somehow, hunched over, her eyes desperate. For a moment, I thought maybe she had finally come to apologize. Maybe all those years apart had made her realize how cruel she'd been. But no, that wasn't why she was there. She was drowning in debt. My father had passed away, and it turned out he'd left behind a mountain of unpaid bills. The house was about to be foreclosed. Creditors were calling day and night. She needed help, and not just emotional support. She needed money. Lots of it. I listened in silence as she spun a sad story about hardship and bad luck, carefully, glossing over her years of mistreatment toward me. She spoke as if we were the closest of friends, like none of it had ever happened. Like she hadn't stood in a room full of people and declared me the shame of her family. When she finally finished, she looked at me with teary eyes and said, "You're my only hope." I stared at her across my desk. For a long moment, I said nothing. Part of me felt pity. She was still my mother, after all. But a louder part of me remembered the sting of humiliation. The countless nights I cried myself to sleep. The years of feeling unwanted, unloved. I thought about how she had never once called to check on me after that night. How she never congratulated me when my business took off. How I had built my life completely without her, and now she wanted me to bail her out? I leaned back in my chair and gave her a small, sad smile. "I'm sorry you're going through a hard time," I said slowly, "but I think you should ask the people you weren't ashamed of for help." Her face crumpled. She opened her mouth. to protest, but I stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. Security escorted her out of the building. I sat back down at my desk and exhaled deeply. My hands were shaking a little. Part of me felt cruel, but a bigger part of me felt lighter than I had in years. For once, I had chosen myself, and I didn't feel ashamed at all. After that day, I expected the calls to stop. I thought maybe my mother would finally get the message that I wasn't her backup plan, her emergency fund, her disposable disappointment to summon when things got rough. But I was wrong. The calls kept coming. From her, from my aunts, even from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. They all tried the same tactics: guilt, shame, manipulation. "She's still your mother," they'd say. "Family sticks together. You owe her for raising." You? Owe her? I thought about the countless times she made sure I knew just how little she thought of me. I remembered every cruel word, every backhanded compliment, every public humiliation. I owed her nothing. Eventually, I changed my number. For the first time in my life, I realized that being family doesn't give someone a free pass to treat you like garbage and then expect you to pick up the pieces when it's convenient for them. I lived in peace for almost a year after that. Business continued booming. I opened a second location, hired more employees. Life was good, better than it had ever been. Then one day, while I was leaving the office late at night, I found her waiting outside. My mother, standing under the flickering streetlight like some ghost from my past. I froze. For a moment, it felt like I was a child again, small, powerless, desperate for her approval. But then I shook it off. I was not that kid anymore. I was a grown man who had built a life from scratch. I had nothing to prove to her. Still, something about her stopped me from walking away. Maybe it was the rain soaking her clothes. Maybe it was the sheer sadness in her eyes. "Please," she said hoarsely. "I have nowhere else to go." Against my better judgment, I let her sit in the lobby while I called her a cab. She tried again, tried to reel me back in with sob stories and false promises. She talked about how proud she secretly was of me, how she regretted everything she'd said, how she wished she could take it all back. But it was too late. You can't unsay words like that. You can't erase years of belittlement with a few desperate compliments. As the cab pulled up, she clutched my hand tightly. "If you turn your back on me," she said, "you'll regret it." Her words echoed in my ears long after she was gone. But you know what? I didn't regret it. I slept better that night than I had in years. Life moved on. I heard through distant relatives that my mother had moved into a small, run-down apartment on the edge of town. She was picking up odd jobs, cleaning houses, working late-night shifts at convenience stores. Part of me pitied her, sure. But another part of me remembered that she had chosen her pride over her son a long time ago. A few months later, I got invited to a family gathering. My cousin's wedding. The same cousin whose engagement party had been the stage for my mother's ultimate betrayal. At first, I was tempted to decline. Memories of that night still burned in my mind. But then I thought, no, I deserved to show up. I deserved to stand tall and show them all that I wasn't the shame of the family. I arrived wearing a tailored suit, my company's logo gleaming on my cufflinks. Heads turned when I walked in. I could see the whispers starting immediately. But this time, they weren't sneers or pity. They were curiosity, respect, maybe even envy. And there she was, my mother, standing awkwardly near the back of the room in a faded dress that had seen better days. Our eyes met across the room. For a brief second, I thought she might come over. Maybe apologize. Maybe something. But she didn't. Instead, she turned away. And just like that, I realized she wasn't capable of change. She wasn't capable of admitting she was wrong. She never had been, and she never would be. I stayed for the ceremony, smiled politely at the relatives who now suddenly wanted to be my best friends, and left without saying a word to her. Driving home that night, I felt a strange sense of closure. Not the kind of closure you get from forgiveness or reconciliation. No, it was the closure that comes from finally accepting that some people, even family, simply aren't good for you. It was the closure that comes from choosing yourself, and it was the best feeling in the world. A few weeks after the wedding, I got a call from an unknown number. For a moment, I hesitated. Part of me wondered if it was a client, someone important for the business. Another part of me just knew who it would be. I answered. It was my mother. Her voice was softer this time, almost unrecognizable. No anger, no accusations, just exhaustion. She told me she had been evicted. She said she was sleeping in her car some nights, couch surfing others. That she was sick but couldn't afford the doctor. That she was hungry. She didn't ask for money outright. She didn't have to. The silence on my end said everything. After a long pause, she said quietly, "I'm proud of you. I really am. I didn't know how to show it." Those words hit harder than any insult she had ever thrown my way. I didn't respond. I simply hung up. I sat there, staring at the wall, feeling a strange ache in my chest. Guilt? Maybe. But not the kind she was hoping for. I realized something that night. Sometimes people say they're proud of you not because they truly are, but because they have no choice left. Because your success is the only lifeline they have to cling to. It's not love, it's survival. And I wasn't interested in being anyone's lifeline anymore, especially not for someone who had let me drown for most of my life. Months passed. Seasons changed. My business expanded again, a third location this time. I bought a new house, bigger than anything my family had ever lived in growing up. Sometimes I'd sit on the balcony at night, staring at the stars, wondering what my life would have looked like if I had let them drag me down with them. I never wondered for long. I knew the answer. I'd be broke, bitter, still chasing after scraps of approval that were never going to come. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I noticed a small figure sitting on the curb outside. For a moment, my heart stopped. It was my mother, again. This time, she wasn't just soaked from the rain. She was thin, frail, almost unrecognizable. She looked up at me, and there was no anger in her eyes anymore. Just a kind of brokenness that was almost hard to look at. Almost. "Please," she whispered. "Just a place to stay, just for a few nights. I'll be gone after that, I swear." I stood there, the old battle raging inside me. The child who had once desperately wanted her love, and the man who had learned he deserved better. "I can't," I said quietly. Her shoulders slumped like all the life had drained out of her, without another word. She stood and slowly walked away into the night. I didn't follow. I didn't even look back, because sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to finally let go. Over the next year, I heard bits and pieces about my mother's life. She had found a spot at a local shelter. She was picking up odd jobs where she could. Some distant relative tried to guilt me again, but their words bounced right off. Because here's the truth no one likes to talk about. You are allowed to protect your peace, even from your own family, especially from your own family. One afternoon, I was sitting in my office finishing up paperwork when a young woman came in, a journalist working on a piece about successful entrepreneurs who had beaten the odds. She wanted to interview me. I almost laughed. Beaten the odds? That was an understatement. As I told her my story, the parts I was willing to share anyway, she asked if there was one piece of advice I would give to people trying to climb out of a toxic family situation. I thought about it for a long moment. Then I said, "Learn to walk away. And when you do, don't look back." Later that night, As I drove home, I passed the old neighborhood where I grew up. The houses looked smaller now, the streets darker, narrower. It was like stepping back into a nightmare I had long since woken up from. I pulled over for a moment, letting the memories wash over me. The shouting matches, the silent dinners, the feeling of never being enough. Then I drove away without another glance, because my life wasn't back there. It was ahead of me, and it was mine, all mine. It's funny how, when you finally get everything you've ever wanted, the people who once tried to drag you down suddenly appear, expecting a seat at your table. But you've learned a thing or two along the way. You've learned that success isn't just about money or status or things. It's about peace of mind. It's about knowing your worth and never allowing anyone to diminish it, not even the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. That night, I received a message on my phone. It was from my mother. I know I messed up. I've hurt you in ways I can never fix, but I'm sorry. I need help. Please, I have nowhere else to turn. I stared at the screen for a long time, my finger hovering over the reply button. For a moment, I considered it, offering her something, anything. But then I remembered all the times I had sacrificed my dreams, my ambitions, just to please her. All the years I had spent chasing after approval that was never going to come. So I let the message sit there, unanswered. For days, I thought about it. I thought about the little boy who had once desperately wanted to prove himself worthy of love, of attention, of care. I thought about the man I had become, stronger, independent, and more than capable of moving forward without anyone's help. But I also thought about forgiveness. Not for her sake, but for mine. Because sometimes, forgiveness is the only way to free yourself, not from what they did, but from the pain they left behind. I finally responded, and the message I sent was simple. I hope you find peace, Mom, but I can't help you anymore. And that was it. That was the end of the story. The final chapter. Over. The next few years, my life continued to unfold in ways I never could have imagined. My business boomed. I met someone special, a partner who truly supported me, not because of what I could give, but because of who I was. I finally felt like I was living my life for myself. Then, one evening, I received a call from my cousin. It was the first time I had heard from her in years. She had always been close to my mother, and she told me that my mom had passed away. The news hit me harder than I thought it would. But it wasn't the loss of a mother I was mourning. It was the loss of what could have been. The chance at a relationship that was never going to happen. The mother I had always wanted was just a dream, an illusion. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilt. Instead, I felt relief. It was over. I was free. I attended the small memorial service, but it felt like a formality. I wasn't there for closure. I was there because it was what society expected me to do. There was no reconciliation to be had. No, I'm sorry, that would fix everything. The past couldn't be rewritten. But it didn't matter anymore. I had already written my own story, and I was living it. A year later, I took a trip to the mountains, something I had always dreamed of doing. As I hiked up the trail, with nothing but the sound of my boots crunching the dirt beneath me, and the wind whistling through the trees, I realized something profound. We are all on our own paths. We all face struggles, setbacks, and disappointments. But those things don't define us. What defines us is how we choose to move forward, whether we let the past hold us back or we use it to propel us into a better future. And as I stood on that mountain peak, looking out at the vast landscape, before me, I finally understood. I had made it. Despite everything, despite them, and I wasn't looking back.